This is the other issue of our first week of October episode of Journeys Chronicles of our Asian Century, our news analysis and commentary, and also interviews when we have guests on Asian news, on Philippine-China relations and China-Philippine relations with the rest of the world, and global developments. And of course, the continuing major issue that hogs international news and Philippine news is the Philippine, or rather U.S.-China trade war. But the past week, a new focus came in, and this is the challenge and counter-challenge in the South China Sea, and how China this week stopped the U.S. freedom of navigation operations at sea. Well, it starts, of course, from early this year and all the past years, where the United States of America continues to insist on its version of the freedom of navigation on the high seas. There is a difference between the view of many countries against the U.S., but in the Philippines we only see and we only read about the American version of the freedom of navigation, that this is unlimited over the exclusive economic zone and even into the territorial sea. The Chinese version is you must inform, and that is also India, that is also Saudi Arabia, that is also other countries, many other countries, inform the territorial state when entering the economic zone, and especially when entering the territorial sea. But the U.S. continues to exercise what it calls the freedom of navigation to challenge these claims of territory and interpretation of the laws of the sea. For example, last May, two Navy warships conducted freedom of navigation operations in the Paracels, where China also has claims. Let's take a look at the report from the Diplomat. There you see, the date is May 28. So this has been going on, and they have been doing it in the South China Sea and the Spratly areas, in the claims areas where the Philippines and China have claims. The Philippines never protests because it is under the, it is going by the interpretation of the Americans that this is not necessary, the notification of the territorial state, but China has a different view. Now, after this early Fonops, there have been indications of China's displeasure, and just September last month, China denied the U.S. warship a port of call in Hong Kong. China, there it is, and Beijing's move came after the U.S. Penalized China's Equipment Development Department, the agency that oversees the country's defense technology, and its director Li Shangfu for allegedly engaging in the purchase of Russian combat aircraft and S-400 surface-to-air missiles, which it called a violation of American sanctions. So this and the protests of these Fonops, China exercised its powers and denied the port of call of American warship to Hong Kong. But the more significant event after that is this deliberate challenge again from America. American warship sails near disputed island, challenging China, and this is dated September 30, just a week ago. And this is the USS Decatur or Decatur that sailed 12 miles of the territorial sea of China. It said here, this month, the State Department imposed sanctions on a Chinese military agency for buying Russian, well, anyway, this is a repetition, this quotation. But you can see this is proudly declared. USS Decatur conducts 10-hour patrol in the South China Sea, sailing within 12 nautical miles of Chinese-held outposts in Spratly Island chain. Okay, So what did China do? China faced it with a warship of its own and blocked its path. And so the reaction of the Americans is, this is something new. This is a real counter challenge. China's atypical response, not typical, atypical, in the ordinary response to U.S. naval Fonops may be a message to Trump administration. What do you mean maybe? It is a message to the Trump administration. That you cannot just enter the territorial sea and even the exclusive economic zone claimed by China, or China would say their territorial sea and their exclusive economic zone. We should be doing the same, but we never do that. So you saw the picture from that first image, and here is another set of pictures I prepared to show how the encounter happened. Let's see that the image after that, the three ships. The first one is on top. So the Chinese blocked the path by the side of USS Decatur, forcing USS Decatur on the second to slow down and let the Chinese vessel pass, while it also veered a little away and the distance grew. Mga 45 yards down. 45 yards is around 45 meters lang. Yung mga malalaking higanting barko na yan, these are huge, huge warships, and 45 meters is like two men standing 1 meter away from each other, or even closer, half a meter away from each other, ready to punch each other. When China does this, it is saying, I am ready for war. I am ready for a fight. And China is ready for a fight in the South China Sea and in Asia against the U.S. China is not threatening any of the ASEAN countries, not threatening any of the Northeast Asian countries, but it is particularly addressed to the United States of America. The occupation of many islands by China, the installation of defense facilities, which they do not see as militarization because this is defensive, because the real militarization by the definition of China is this continued penetration of the territorial areas of China, including the exclusive economic zone, by American aircraft carriers, warships, and so on. Of course, this has never been put to test 10 years before because China was not ready. Now China is ready. China is saying, you stay away. If you want to pass by, like anybody coming into a house with a fence, you knock first. You ring the doorbell. No, American imperialism has always had free reign all over the seas. They have to get some, this has to require some getting used to for them. Well, the China was number one business opportunity for America for 30, 40 years. And China was number one ally against Russia, Soviet Russia before. What has changed? Well, here's one opinion from Hal Brands that came out in Bloomberg. Then there is the third driver of rising American hostility to China, the threat to U.S. economic competitiveness. To be clear, organized labor was always skeptical of engagement with China out of fears, justified as it turned out, that increased trade with Beijing would accelerate the hollowing out of American manufacturing. Well, that's your industrialists' fault. The interest of your capitalists and of your country and truly of your consumers because of lower Chinese prices for their goods. Let's go back to that. That increased trade with Beijing would accelerate the hollowing out of American manufacturing, yet that concern has become more politically salient as Trump harnessed frustration with dislocation of globalization in his 2016 campaign, with China as a poster child for all that had gone wrong. As Trump showed, there are votes in China bashing. Well, of course, Trump is facing the midterm elections and tumataas po. The China bashing is increasing inside the United States. So this propaganda is good for Trump's midterm elections. After the elections, that's another matter. We will, I think, expect Trump to soften and start negotiating and reviving dialogues and so on. But Trump is not the United States. He's just a temporary occupant of the White House who is struggling with the real powers in the U.S. today to try to hang on to the seat inside the Oval Office, the White House. As we can see, all these attempts at blocking his candidate for the Supreme Court, Kavanaugh, the constant, 2-year constant, non-stop the destruction of Trump's image by CNN and all the other mainstream media too, because there is a core in the U.S. system that wants continuous war and wants to be continuously #1 in the world. And of course, ito ang nakita. This is what the author and film director, documentary film producer and director John Pilger has seen, and he has produced. We have shown parts of it before in this show of ours, Journeys. The Coming War on China, a film by John Pilger. I put John Pilger's image there. The Coming War on China is John Pilger's 60th film for ITV. Pilger reveals what the news doesn't, that the world's greatest military power, the United States, and the world's second economic power, China, both nuclear armed, are on the road to war. Pilger's film is a warning and an inspiring story of resistance of various peoples, including the peoples of the Polynesian Islands, where the Americans started testing nuclear weapons and so on, and the resistance that China is preparing against the American war. And one of the best pictures or images that John Pilger prepared is this map of the military bases of America surrounding China, from Japan, South Korea, the Philippines, in Thailand, in Australia. And that is really, of course, the center of American military monitoring of China. That is why China also had to station their missiles and their bombers in the islands in the South China Sea. So it's nearer and can reach Australia. Remember, in the Second World War, the Japanese tried to reach Australia, but it was too far for them. Now it is no longer too far for the missiles and bombers of China. And China is ready, and that is why China is counter-challenging the United States. Now, of course, for the Philippines, we also have to face some questions. Because of the EDCA and Noynoy Aquino's compliance with the American interest, and of course, former and non-Chief Justice Sereno, and the majority in the Senate that kowtows to the United States, minus, of course, Miriam Defensor Santiago, who was opposing the approval of the EDCA without Senate concurrence. Now, the Americans have been allowed to redeploy their troops and their equipment, pre-station their equipment in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 bases in the Philippines. So let's show that map, please. Ano itong mga base? The last map, do you have it? That's the one. Yan. Ito po ang mga mapa. These are the sites of the American equipment and personnel. Fort Magsaysay, Nueva Ecija, Basa Air Base in Pampanga, Benito Ebuan Air Base in Cebu, Lumbia Air Base in Cagayan de Oro, and Antonio Bautista Air Base in Palawan. Now, these 5 places in the Philippines, if the Americans start a proxy war and use the Philippines, China will have to, not that it wants to, that is why it is working very hard to avoid this and to extend its friendship to the Philippines. But China, in a war, in a fight with America, will have to preemptly destroy these bases. And unfortunately, you cannot avoid the damage around the bases And if America starts a nuclear exchange, then God forbid, though I'm not religious and theistic, but I just use the term God forbid. So these affect us seriously, and hopefully not tragically, and we can prevent this. This challenge and counter-challenge will continue to increase. Maybe after the midterm elections of Trump, and he gets an advantage, he will allow himself to soften up and start negotiating the only intelligent path, which we have an item here. I skipped this one. An analysis by Will Satran and Hunter Marston in The Diplomat. And what does it say? Let's take a look at that. There it is. Washington must own up to superpower competition with China. In other words, Washington must accept the reality. Let's read it. The National Defense Strategy and National Security Strategy demonstrated that rigorous strategic thinking exists within the bureaucracies of the U.S. government. In other words, it's saying, may mga matatalino, there are bright people doing the right thinking in the U.S. government. But Trump has failed to show that he comprehends or supports the core promises of these two key documents. These are prepared by these think tanks, so blunting their efficacy. The White House should unequivocally declare that it recognizes what is at stake in this new superpower competition and pledge to responsibly manage what is undoubtedly the most important bilateral relationship in the world, China and the U.S. By undertaking these steps, the United States can manage its relationship with China and continue to enjoy the benefits of global superpower, but without acknowledging the power struggle it finds itself in and working to shape the rules of the game, Washington has forfeited the competition before even engaging. Now, China has declared very clearly, China does not want to be the power over the world, but it wants to be respected, and it wants to have its place in Asia. It wants to have a secure place in Asia. It wants all the American bases eventually out of this region. And so that is all that China is telling the United States. Get out of the China Sea. Let us have, this is the other proposition of China, have a multipolar world. The United States, you dominate North America, Europe, the Eurasian land bridge, the Eurasian continent, Russia, China, and the European Union together, Asia, China, and ASEAN together, Brazil, Latin America as one, Africa as one, with Brazil at the lead. That is the world that China envisions. So, that is our message also. After this challenge and counter-challenge should come compromise. And the compromise must be from the U.S. To give up its gunboat diplomacy and start talking prosperity and peace based on the plan of the BRICS countries and China, the Belt and Road Initiative. So with that, we leave you some thoughts and hope you join us in our crusade for ensuring and securing 100 years of the Asian century of prosperity and global peace. Thank you very much.